say a toe-to-so, but you know what? A toe-to-so. A fucking a toe-to-so.
Hello and welcome back to this episode of The Bottlemen, that podcast about Canada to which you are currently listening. A podcast about Canada and Foley.
That's right.
That's what that is. My co-host, Dan Beckner, of course, ably doing a perfect sound effect for dropping what sounds like an empty pudding can off of a desk.
It was the cap to this soda that I'm drinking. The brand is Aha. Which I've switched to because I found out that my other favorite soda, Bubbly, with one B, has partnered with SodaStream. So I can't drink it anymore. So
yeah, see, you had to move to Aha, a BDS compliant soda.
Yeah.
And joining us once again, we are very pleased to have Matt Christman with us. Another edition of Canadian Prime Ministers Through History. Matt, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me back. Love to talk about Canada, the friendly version of America. Isn't that right?
That's right. That's right.
Yep.
The soft, cuddly version of America. Who would never ever cry because they weren't getting nuclear submarines from their big brother down south to help protect the world against China.
No, we would never throw a sort of a minor strop because we weren't being given nuclear submarines to militarize the Arctic for some reason. Not us at all.
We would never sit in our big high chair and wave and kick our chubby little arms and legs and scream about militarizing the Arctic.
Look, can os ock. It fits so well. It trips off the tongue. We should be in there. But no, we're going to continue our little exploration through history of Canada and what Canada has meant through the thinking about people who have led us, right? And you know, as Matt is sort of a very knowledgeable about sort of, you might say, the last several centuries of North American history generally. I think it's offers a very interesting point of comparison to look at, say, the various sort of psychoses and manias that caused a Canadian, a bunch of dour Scotsmen to come and, try to scratch a living off the Canadian shield, and as much as it sort of drove other insane English Puritans to try to find, a society without sin and decadence in Plymouth Rock, right? These are I sort of see these things as slightly parallel, but going in very different directions. So I mean, Matt, like, if we're talking about our foundation stories, in terms of how you see the American sort of foundation myth, the foundation story, we just get like a quick précis of it so we can see the comparison to the Canadian stories.
So the American foundation myth is a tale of rugged frontier settlers who are, after being choked by the yoke of tyranny from their brethren in England who tax them without representation, who do something bad involving tea that none of us are really very clear on. That is a very important part of it, is that the tea thing that nobody actually understands. Mm-hmm. Most people, if you ask them in America, what was the deal with the tea? If they knew what you were talking about, they would say, oh yeah, they were taxing the tea. The tea was costing too much. Actually, no. The tea was going to be cheaper. They were going to the British were going to make the tea cheaper because they were going to abolish all the middlemen, all of the little merchant middlemen in Boston who are getting between the crown monopoly and the customers, and it was going to actually reduce the cost, but that was also going to reduce the premium that those guys could charge. So they got pissed off and decided to tell everybody else, hey, you guys are really mad about this tea stuff. And then people were mostly just completely shit-faced all the time. And they're like, sure, whatever. You want me to dress up like an Indian and throw some shit into the water? That's fine by me. But but resisting this tyranny, the country came together under the leadership of God Emperor George Washington, and we kicked the shit out of them with no help from anyone else, certainly not the French, or the Dutch, or the Spanish. And in so doing, we're able to forge our own independent country based on freedom, the freedom to pay as little for tea as possible.
Well, as little or indeed as much with as many middlemen as we can possibly cram into this process.
So as many beaks getting wet as possible.
I'm just thinking about the guy in the sugar pile. You know, when Homer has the sugar pile and he pulls the guy up? Yeah. Just a nation of that, but it's a pile of tea.
Yeah. Yeah, we fight to preserve the sacred retailer, distributor, wholesaler relationship.
Everybody gets a slice.
But I think like one of the interesting things, right, is that is when you come to America, there is this sense almost that it is one of these first modern projects, right? The creation by sort of, by human craft and ingenuity or divine inspiration or whatever of this entirely new place, this new type of place. And again, how well that gets, accomplished, how that sort of gels with people who are having to contend with all of the samenesses of the old that they bring over with them. Seems like the foundation of America, whether you're talking about its myth or whether you're sort of pricking open its myth, in all cases, it seems like this very psychically turbulent time. It is sort of great schisms and creations, and it's full of drama, I think. You would say is that accurate?
Oh yes, it is a titanic struggle. It is a people coming into awareness of themselves through struggle.
Mm. And I think if by thinking a little bit about the life and times of John A. Macdonald, we can explore a little bit of the vast differences in Canada's foundation myth from America's, because they are quite considerable. So I'm just going to read, this is from the diary of a woman called Anna Brownell Jameson, who was a sort of a traveler in Ontario who wrote this in 1837. She remarked on the seemingly interminable line of trees before you, the boundless wilderness around you, the mysterious depths amid the multitudinous foliage, where foot of man hath never penetrated, the solitude in which we proceeded mile after mile, no human being, no human dwelling within sight.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as someone who frequently has to drive from Montreal to Toronto for work, like on tour, that stretch of highway, as soon as you leave Quebec and you travel through the great green nothingness that is Ontario, all the way down to Ontario's Ohio, southern Ontario, it has like a mind erasing effect. So I think that still persists, but instead of like boundless tracts of wilderness, it's just sort of like half built up agricultural land and then like en route gas plazas over and over and over again.
But it's what I think sort of what this strikes me about the passage from Anna Brownell Jameson is how sort of distinct it is from a lot of how America would have been described in its own early days, as late as the 19th century even, which is this place where, there are tracks. God has prepared a track in the wilderness for us. He has, given us this bountiful land that is for human habit. It is a gift. It's our free real estate. Whereas the myth of the Canadian land even has always been that it's other, it's difficult, it's wild, it's wilderness, it's the unfarmable Canadian shield cutting off the populated sort of areas of Ontario and Quebec from the fertile land of the prairies. Like, you couldn't expand from Ontario to Manitoba just by walking over and farming the next plot of land, because the farmable land stops for a very long time.
Yes.
Like, you had to be very, very intent to like get to the actual prairies, which is one of the reasons that Canada is sort of so fractious. But I see it as imagined as two very different places, because I'm not wrong to say how a lot of American settlers saw it was a place for us ordained by God, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, that was the whole project. Is that this is a place to impose our will outside of the restraining structures of European society, and just a blank slate.
Yeah, and so just a little more sort of on our sort of deep Canadian history. They can ask the question: if all of these were sort of British colonies at sort of different points, the simple answer as to why Canada wasn't incorporated is because the Protestants of America could not stand to get into a political union with a largely French and Catholic country of Canada, the province of Canada above them. They would not have it.
That's right.
And there was no question of these, sinners and papists being included in God's great project for us. And this sort of, I think, comes to one of our sort of first points, because I want to sort of explore the life of John A. Macdonald a bit thematically, right? I think that this comes to our discussion of why Canada is a fake country. Because you say, like, America is born out of or at least even its stories are a people finding itself, a people creating itself,
revolutionary struggle and a destiny.
Yeah. Whereas Canada is, and again we'll sort of talk about this a bit more. The story of the creation of Canada is largely the story of new management taking over a set of existing infrastructures that were already there. Right, George Washington was this statesman and a general who led across the Delaware and so on. John A. Macdonald was a drunk lawyer, basically.
That's right.
He was a boss Tweed figure, who was who played a game of patronage politics, who liked to make deals, and who frequently got so drunk he would puke on stage
during debates.
During debates,
that's just showmanship, honestly.
Our first prime minister could burp the national anthem and puke on command.
Yeah, and that's another interesting thing we're going to get into is that in one man you have the duality of the Canadian. You have the oaf, who we detailed the last time we had you on, Matt, and you have the oaf overseer occupying the same body at war with itself. But his oafish behavior in vomiting during a political debate only endeared him to the oaf class. And I think the oaf overseers around him recognized that and were either jealous of it or impressed.
They certainly recognized the power to be able to entrust the creation of this country into the hands of someone who they understood was one of their class, one of those people charged with managing the oafs. But who could, just by his own weaknesses and his own public displays of oafishness, guarantee a certain degree of trust from the people who needed to be brought along on the project.
That's right.
One of his most famous quotes on being drunk, because he did that thing where he did like pithy quotes about being drunk, like Churchill. Was he was in a political debate with a guy from the Clear Grit Party, because there's no sand or dirt in us. We are clear grit all the way down.
Clear
George
grit.
Brown, and said, he said, "Sir, you are on the stage, your debate stage, drunk. Have you no respect for the people?" And he said, "I think the people would prefer John A. drunk to George Brown sober." And another, when he vomited on stage, this was later on. He sort of recovered by saying, "Sorry, I only vomited because your ideas were so bad."
Brilliant.
Yeah, perfect. Which, to be fair, is like, that's just classic. I feel like that's sort of that is pure sort of showman politics. Is being like, how do I get the audience back?
Yeah,
I vomited. I need to keep them in. I need to keep them on side.
That's something I could see Trump doing something like that. It's like,
oh yeah,
definite.
And the other sort of theme I think I want to talk about is like so much of the history of Canada, from Confederation to the tariff policy. Some of his famous like achievements, right? Confederation, the national policy, which is about tariffs, and then the railway itself, were just purely a reaction to what was going on in America. It was Canada's structure was Canada's fundamental, the things that made Canada Canada, these early great achievements of our sort of first and best statesman, our first and commonly thought of as best statesman, not anymore because of all of the awful things he did, which we'll get to, we're reacting to America. Or we're taking ideas from, we're either stealing ideas from the British and sort of applying them for sort of, the colonial sort of genocide of the native population in Canada, or doing things for fear of what America would do if he didn't do them, or to try to induce America to do things by doing them.
Yes.
Right. But to be taken seriously by the Americans as a real country. So shall we start with a contemporary article about John A. Macdonald and why we should respect him?
Yeah.
This is by Tristan Hopper in the National Post.
Okay. I need to jump in before we do this article. For anyone outside of Canada who doesn't know who Tristan Hopper is, and there's absolutely no reason why you should know. He's a little.
If you like good articles,
he's a little nasty little freak who now has, I believe, a weekly column with the Globe and Mail. But Hopper, to me, when we're talking about Hopper, we got to remember that this is a man who murdered a raccoon and posted pictures of him and his dad standing over the corpse because he thought it was funny. This is a man who...
Oh, sorry, I want to do a tangent on the tangent. I'm sorry, but
okay.
Do either of you guys know who Jolyon Mom is?
No,
he's a British guy.
It sounds totally
He's
made
a
up.
British guy.
Yeah.
So he is made up. He's a British guy, but he's real. He was like one of these like anti-Corbyn, pro-Remain guys, right? He was like a Twitter-obsessed like lawyer who posted all the time, and so it's like, Corbyn's gonna take us back to the 70s. One of these. On Boxing Day after the 2019 election, he just voluntarily posted, "Well, I've had quite a morning. I've just killed a fox with a baseball bat, and I'm wearing nothing but my wife's kimono when I'm locked outdoors." I feel this guys love to admit to accidentally to doing animal cruelty and just posting about it.
And it's just incredibly British too.
Oh yeah, just him wearing like a slightly too small kimono, holding a bat covered in a cricket bat covered in fox blood. Yeah. He got the world he wanted. Anyway, sorry, Tristan Hopper.
Yeah, I just want to read, just before we find out what Tristan thinks about John A. Macdonald, we should just hear, I want to read you guys a couple of his tweets. This is a recent one. How many couples are having sex right now in Canada? Is it the thousands, tens of thousands? Has there ever been a moment in our history, however brief, in which no one was boning? So that's one.
It's every moment in the Hopper household.
Number two,
I guess, is
a photograph of the Disney princess Ariel from The Little Mermaid.
Oh no!
Ariel is easily the sexiest Disney princess, but this Dollarama suncatcher really ramps up the come hither look. This is a national columnist, and then my absolute favorite. I've never really gotten over the fact that most people are having sex regularly. Kids think she's just an actress playing Snow White at Disneyland, but I know that she'll be eventually engaged in sweaty marital congress, probably within hours.
What? He's going to Disneyland and just sort of breaking the fourth wall by being like, I know that this is just a costume, and what you actually do is, so he's just jacking off the entire time he's writing this.
Yes, definitely. And so I think it's important to know what kind of mind you're dealing with before we continue on to his thoughts on it's like our founding prime minister.
That's a guy. It's a guy who could use an exorcism as Tristan Hopper.
He's a milder version of Rod Dreher.
He's feeling himself, and I respect it.
Yeah. He loves to fantasize about what's under what's under that beast costume. I wonder.
That's right.
No, so this is Tristan Hopper's article on John A. Macdonald. It was from a few years ago. only Boris Yeltsin, the first president of the Russian Republic, could be said to have had a comparable record as a drunk politician, stumbling in public and being too drunk to event state events, among other lapses. But where Mr. Yeltsin is widely seen as a drunken clown who handed Russia to oligarchs and set up the country for semi-dictatorial rule of Vladimir Putin, Macdonald's record stands the test of time. Yes, the annals of Canadian history are littered with drunks, and yes, they generally destroyed their political careers, but the fact that Macdonald managed so many achievements underlines his innate ability and character despite occasional flaws. Which again is sort of reframing Macdonald's quite, let's say, substantial role, almost as the architect, you might say, of the ongoing sort of genocidal program of residential schools that were established all across Canada.
Or the establishment of a national police force, which would be, I believe, like the first national police force continentally, right? Like,
actually, if we want to talk about this, we can talk a little bit about sort of. I'm sort of doing a jump around here in my orders, right? But I think one of the reasons we sort of are trying to sort of people are fighting over the legacy of John A. Macdonald. I mean, he's one of these guys, for your benefit, Matt, who has statues being argued, torn down, put up. People put up statues of him to trigger the libs. A Montreal mayoral candidate has said he would keep the John A. Macdonald statue up, but with an explanatory plaque. All of our statue mania centers on this man.
Yep.
The conservatives who are like, if you touch one hair on his bronze head, you are consigning Canadian history to the dustbin. The other people who are like, well, no, obviously we shouldn't have a statue of this man. What I find interesting, right, is that in America, the focal point of the statue battles tend to be Confederate generals, right?
Right.
They tend to be people who were removed from the or who are imagined to be removed from the American project as people who sort of fought against what it became. They are other to American history as it is conceived of broadly, right?
I mean, depending on who you're talking to, you know, there's a very incoherent argument that says that it's all America and it's all history and you can't discriminate between any of it. And if you get rid of any of the statues, we're all going to become demented and forget our history. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, they're not Americans, although I mean that it's changed. Like there has been a move towards going at, because a lot of people would say is sort of an attempt to defend and as a troll to say, well, what about, you know, the founders who were slave owners or whatever? Mm-hmm. And a lot of the people who have been opposed to Confederate statues say yes, them too. And there have been some very exuberant crowds that have like overturned statues of Abraham Lincoln, for example. Mm-hmm. But it's generally Confederate generals, yes.
Yeah, and with Macdonald, what I think is interesting is this character is our George Washington, right? This is our first guy, the big guy.
He's the big guy.
If you ask a group of Canadians who's the father of Confederation, like there were a bunch of them. It was him. If you ask a Quebecois person, they would say Cartier maybe. But generally speaking, people will say John A. Macdonald. But he also, it's kind of like in the sense of coming to terms with the sort of great historical crimes that were committed in order to create this country. It's like Robert E. Lee was president, and was George Washington, basically.
Well, yeah, but that's like a lot of it's just because you guys don't have any of our cool stuff. You didn't have a revolution. You didn't have a civil war. It's just a bunch of it's a bunch of paperwork, basically.
Yes, 100%.
We filed for Confederation status and shit.
And boy,
did we a few rebellions. That's all you got. But like the rebellions are all like all the people who did the rebellions are now considered like leftist icons or something.
Yeah, those rebellions mostly got crushed. And yeah, like you were saying, the paperwork, it's mainly in the service of looking at the country and saying, well, we can't just be like a continent-wide company town run by Hudson's Bay, right? Like with an oppositional group of French people nestled away inside of it. We need to assume a country-like shape.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much I think that really nails it, right? Which is that sort of the Canadas is Upper and Lower Canada, roughly corresponds to Eastern Ontario and then Southern Quebec. And then the maritime provinces stay British colonies after sort of for a little bit longer. Like PEI stays in British colonies for a bit longer, but they sort of join in. But much of these, but much of the landmass of what is now Canada is owned directly by Hudson's Bay Company and is purchased by Canada sort of later on for some hundreds of thousands of pounds, basically. But I think the story of Confederation being essentially a kind of just management restructuring of a large mining company is kind of not far off, because this is. And Matt, you talk about the revolution, like these sort of attempted revolutions as being sort of leftist icons. Those are even like the ones that we think of, like Louis Riel. Those are sort of after Confederation, who Macdonald himself, by the way, has executed. The rebellions beforehand, they're not really sort of thought of. Like what happens is there are some minor skirmishes, basically, right? In 1837, you get John A. Macdonald, who was called Ugly John in his youth, who was practicing as, because everyone was named John because they were all Scots Presbyterian. And so if you weren't named John, you were considered to be a tall poppy.
How ugly did you have to be in 1837 to be the ugly Scottish John?
Yeah, that is a good question, because the first attractive person didn't appear on Earth until like 1925.
Mm-hmm.
So he's born in Scotland, in Glasgow. His parents move over to Canada. His dad is a failed serial entrepreneur, like so many. But Canada is a country of failed Scottish serial entrepreneurs.
Yes,
who can't keep like a tarp store open in Paisley, and so just come over to fail to open a tarp store here and then have kids. So he has so he comes over here or over. I'm in Britain. He goes over there from where I am, and is raised in Kingston, and becomes a barrister specifically because he doesn't really care about the trades, and being a barrister is a pretty obvious route to power and influence without having to do a ton of work.
It's also crucially a job that during that time, when I was going through some of the reading here, during that time, barristers were notorious for just getting absolutely shit hammered, especially in Cornwall and Kingston specifically. If you were a barrister, you were probably a drunk.
In fact, I mean that's why the in the UK, right, the Inns of Court, which are like the official professional bodies which you have to belong to if you're a barrister, were literal inns that they would go and drink at while waiting to be hired by clients to go and, I guess, drunkenly represent them in front of a man in a wig. But what I'm getting at, right, is one of John's cases, right, is in 1837, he's a member of a colonial militia. And then subsequently in 1838, as these little uprisings begin, sort of echoes of what happened in America earlier, John actually ends up representing as a lawyer the one guy who was tried outside of Toronto in this and some of these Ontario skirmishes, and then a group of sympathetic Americans who came up to try to free Canada from the yoke of the British. And this is all in 1838. But all of this ends up with the first bit of paperwork being filed and Canada being granted responsible government in 1848. You know, I mean, it's 1848, a year of many happenings. But this is sort of where we get the beginnings of well, we're not our own country, but we're responsible for more things domestically.
Things are coalescing.
It's this slow transfer of power from the colonial authorities who are like, we don't really want to bother with this anymore. And you know, this is where we sort of get to this quote that I have here from Arthur Lauer in the 1950s saying Canadian history. English Canada inherited not the benefits, but the bitterness of the Revolution. English Canada started its life with as powerful a nostalgic shove backward into the past as conquest had given to French Canada. Two little peoples officially devoted to counter-revolution, lost causes, and the tawdry ideals of a society of men and masters, and not to the self-reliant freedom alongside of them. You know, we're not like Americans. We are counter-revolutionary. We are the Empire loyalists, came up here to stay loyal to Britain. Seigneurs were sort of lived safe from the French Revolution in Quebec. There are places where we knew where we were in the order of things in the world, which is we are there to cut down the trees, to hunt the beavers, to mine the nickel, and later to grow the wheat in the prairies once we eventually do manage to get people beyond the Canadian Shield, right?
But that's
kind of what we're there for.
We needed Ukrainians for the wheat.
Yeah. You mean hardy sheep-coated steppe people.
Stalwart peasants in sheepskin coats. But how does that track, Matt, like with what was happening continuously, like, or alongside in the United States around the same time?
In what sense?
I mean, like, so you've got these uprisings and this coalescing of, the starting of a Canadian state in 1848. What's happening south of the border at that point? How far ahead is the American project?
Well, by that point, you've got the America like as a truly continental aspiration, because that's around the time that that the United States sets its eyes on integrating the territory it's taken after the Mexican War into its sovereignty, and begins the extended sectional crisis that culminates in the Civil War, which really does come about because the U.S., which has this imperative to expand, finally gets its wish, in the sense that it's able to grab this huge chunk of territory from Mexico. But the question of whether or not slavery will be allowed in that territory then takes the issue of slavery, which both parties in the second party system had been very keen to keep away from the forefront of politics, because they understood that it was the one thing that could break up the constitutional order, that could not be assimilated into conventional politics, and makes it increasingly the only issue that anybody really cares about. And by 48, it's starting to happen. Essentially, the America expansionary project is overheating over the question of slavery because of the failure to create an integrated political economy between the two sections.
Yeah, and it was seeing this happening, right? Because as Canada was coalescing from 1848 as responsible government to 1867 as Confederation, is that Canada was looking down, and especially Macdonald, who at this point had sort of gotten, he'd puked on a few stages, he'd made a few drunken quips, he had gotten himself elected in Kingston as an MP, as a conservative, and he was seeing what was happening south of the border, and much of sort of the Canadian provincial system was kind of negotiated out at this time, because we were seeing what happened when there was sort of then power was too distributed federally. There was this great worry that if we did something sort of similar, that we would also fall prey to this kind of this kind of schism. And interestingly,
like
right,
sectarianism.
Sort of after 48, right, in the 1860s, there actually is a kind of nascent political movement in Canada. A bill is actually introduced in the House of Representatives with Canada's consent, now that it is sort of mainly a good, upstanding Anglo colony, and the French have been, most assuredly sort of given sort of second fiddle. There is a bill that's actually introduced by a Massachusetts representative called Nathaniel Prentice Banks to annex part of Canada. But interestingly, a lot of that that political movement doesn't come from inside the American political machine. It comes from the main American motivator to confederate into a country, or one of the main American motivators, which is the Fenian Raids.
Yes.
Which is, Matt, are you familiar with the Fenian Raids?
Oh yeah, of course.
What's going on here?
Yeah, I love those Fenians.
Yeah, what's happening with the Fenian Raids?
So some of the Irish the Scots are pouring into Canada to build a better beaver trap, because Scotland is sometimes considered to be sort of a colonized element of the British Empire, but it got really the best terms of any of the subject peoples that the English subjugated, as opposed to the Irish, who really did get proletarianized very early. In fact, Ireland is where the first real experiments in capitalist agriculture and imperialism were carried out.
Yeah.
They poured down into America, and a number of them got an idea in their head over the years that they could liberate Ireland by conquering Canada and then demanding a swap with England. Which, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if they obviously didn't come very close, but I do kind of wonder what the crown would have made of that sort of trade, because Ireland is right there.
Yeah.
I don't know if they would have been so pleased to make that deal. I don't know, but it never really worked out.
And in fact, if we wanted to sort of go from Canada is a fake country, a sort of ratification of a bunch of mineral rights, basically, and farming rights, and then sort of trying to keep that safe from America, which is sort of dramatic and thunderous and changing. If we want to talk a little bit about the personality of John A. Macdonald, that gels very well with the Fenian Raids, because in 1866, the master of militia for Canada West was a political up-and-comer called John A. Macdonald. And that's right. When he was in 1866, a number of Fenians mounted a raid to seize some farms in Canada West, in Ontario. The township sent telegrams asking for help and calling for the militia to be brought in, but John A. Macdonald was too drunk to answer the telegram and was unable to raise himself or get the militia ready, and just nobody turned up.
According to some of the stuff I read, he was not only too drunk to return the telegram, he was too drunk to comprehend it. He was looking, just basically gone. Could not understand what he was reading, what he was hearing.
Looking at the telegram and just seeing it swim in front of you, think you're holding a snake, you drop it terrified. Because this is a quote from a historian at the time. As the border situation worsened, Macdonald was bombarded by requests for various military posts, including positions in a mounted force that didn't yet exist. He also received numerous offers from Americans to spy for, quote, the Secret Service of Canada for a suitable monetary reward. Macdonald was always a great believer in the enemy and knowing what the enemy was up to, and always authorized, quote, small sums of money for anyone who would give him any information. So he was basically... He loves to get drunk and put on a little show and give out a little prize and just have people generally clap for him and be fans of his and friends of his.
Make some deals.
Yeah. Do you want to talk, Dan? You want to talk about a little bit of sort of John A. Macdonald's oath years?
Yeah. Let me pull it. Oh yeah. All right. So. Yeah, just some quotes about the background of Upper Canada during this time. So, an English visitor in 1840 reported that the people of Upper Canada were much less temperate than the people of the United States. Robert Lamond, an immigrant, warned his fellow Scotsmen in 1821 that the immoderate use of spirits is one of the greatest curses in this country. Finding cheap rum, he wrote, newcomers, quote, often indulge in it to the utmost extent of their voracious appetites. Susanna Moody lamented that, quote, the very low price of whiskey places the temptation constantly within everyone's reach. Don't I know it, lady?
It's too cold.
It is. It's miserable.
That's just at the end of the day, that's what it is. When there's nothing, you can't leave the house for months and months and months at a time. And my God, you can't even watch a streaming television program. How are you not going to just get absolutely shit-faced? To this day in the United States, the drinkingest part of the country is the part I'm from, which is the part that is sort of the most Canadian in its temperature and culture.
Yeah,
the upper Midwest.
That's right.
But what are the things?
When you're faced with sub-zero temperatures and a white sky for months and months at a time, you're gonna sit in your house. And like you said, Matt, at 1821, what are you gonna do? You're gonna sit in your house, stare at the candle reread one of the 3 books you have that aren't like too haram.
Yeah, one of the 3 slightly different Bibles you have, 2 of which give you a heretical thrill.
Talk to your wife. Come on.
You hate her. You know what this is? It's also the it's because it's Canada. Canada was not founded by people seeking to become a new and perfected type of human. It was founded by people who were like, well, I'm going to go work in the forest for a while, and then who just sort of ended up staying. And this is just classic forest guy behavior of just being like, well, I'm going to be a logger in Cowichan Lake, so I guess I'm like, what am I going to do? There's nothing else to do here but cocaine, so I guess I'm just going to do it.
You're going to get an 8-ball, and you're going to sit in your basement and drink a flat of Lucky, staring at the fucking wall.
Yeah.
Like,
and so it's like even sort of gentlemen, and so it was because Canada, like at the time as well, was known by reputation, even in America, as being a liquored up place. Like it was a party territory because everyone was just drunk all the time, more than America.
I want to just throw in like I've got a couple more Wild Years quotes here, and one of them is from Get Fiscal's hometown, Don Hughes' hometown, Cornwall. This is in Cornwall in 1855. It was common to see barristers, quote, stretched out upon the street in a helpless state of intoxication. Elections were notorious for conviviality. Whiskey in large quantities must be wholesome, Dave McPherson remarked after his first campaign, or I would have given a job to a coroner before now.
And the other funny thing, right, is that like John A. Macdonald was at this to a T, right? Like he wasn't constantly drunk, but he was a binge drinker. At any time there was a big event going on, he would drink himself to the point of insensibility. And again, this happened like multiple times in Parliament throughout his career. But that's because one of the reasons because of this is he experienced a great deal of personal tragedy in his early life, losing losing a child, losing 2 children, in fact, losing a wife. It was said after sort of that happened is when he sort of descended into drunkenness. But that his personal style was to get up on stage and then like in order to win an election, it was all by acclaim. You had to get it with a local election at the time to be an MP was the contest of how drunk could you get the sort of vagrants who lived in your constituency. Like whoever got them drunkest tended to win. But in addition to that, his style of politicking was, again, sort of much more in keeping with sort of a Boss Tweed figure, right? Someone who deals in patronage and favors, someone who gives the homeless man a bottle of whiskey, asks him to grow a beard, tells him to vote, shave, and vote again. This is sort of the Macdonald style, even sort of as he governs. This is there's an archive that I pulled some of these from. These are letters to and from John A. Macdonald. He says, to Francis Abbott of Ottawa, Dear Sir, I have to acknowledge the receipt of your memorial on 10th instant, the subject of an increase in wages to you as operator on the Rideau Canal. I shall speak to Mr. Chappé, the Commissioner of Public Works, on your behalf. Yours truly, John A. Macdonald. To Mrs. EDSW Whitkins of Bresco. Madam, I regret to say at present I can hold out little hope of Mr. Wilkins being employed in the public service. After all, the government of Canada is coming to an end, and no appointments are made except those which are absolutely required. It will be the future governor of British North America, me, and the local government of the provinces to make appointments. I remain your very obedient servant, or even one that's just like this. I have mentioned your name favorably to the Commissioner of Public Works, as it rests with him to make the appointment of lighthouse keeper. So it was he ran every stage of politics that he was in, sort of whether he was a master of militia or a keeper of or a low-level MP or whatever. He always ran it like a sort of personal brokerage office, just giving out favors and patronage, sort of making sure he always kept everyone happy, just deal making and drunkenness. And to me, that strikes me as something that you cannot do that if you are wresting a new society from nothing. That's something that you can do if you're just administering a structure for your own benefit, right?
Yeah.
All right. So in 1873, after after Canada is created, after Canada exists as a country, right? It is now a place. The colonial, the corporate colonial apparatus has been turned into a Westphalian state because it's the late 19th century. You have to be a state if you want to exist, right? You can no longer just be a company's sort of sovereign territory. That concept doesn't really work anymore. So we have to have a thing shaped like a state. And I think this goes to, I think, sort of, again, Macdonald's complicity in sort of the genocide of the attempted genocide of the Indigenous people of Canada is, again, one of a backroom deal maker, an administrator, and a sort of a bit of a sort of banality of evil thing, right?
Yeah.
So we can talk about like the Mounties are created in 1873 as a paramilitary force. They become a national police force, but they're paramilitary. They're the Northwest Mounted Police. And they were directly modeled on the Royal Irish Constabulary, which was also a paramilitary colonial police force. And this is in 1873, at the same time as he's building this force, he also is kicked out of office. One of the several times, so one of the interregnums between him being prime minister, he's kicked out of office for engaging in another great Canadian tradition, which is accepting a gigantic bribe on behalf of on behalf of your political party by someone who wants to do a big piece of national infrastructure. Which, like,
he's also massively in debt at this point, right?
Well, he is, but it's the Conservative Party who takes the donation, which is exactly how corruption in Canada works still, where SNC Lavalin just like gets to build the giant hospital with papier mâché instead of concrete because they have a trick where they can get their executives like give over the odds to the Quebec Conservative Party. This is a Canadian tradition, is born with John A. Macdonald, of just big sort of big ticket infrastructure spending that's just full of kickbacks to the party. But what we do is before this happens, right? He creates the Northwest Mounted Police, and what they have to do is they have to go out into the West, which is still effectively just a company town or a company area that is almost all of Canada.
It's not even a town.
Not even a town. Townless. Where most of the people the vast majority of the people who live there are Indigenous or Métis, and then they have to begin they have to then begin enforcing Canadian law, making it so that property rights matter out here. They have to, and the story as to why they were created is one that will be familiar to many people who might understand responsibility to protect. What we say officially is that Macdonald had received reports of the devastating effect of the whiskey trade on the Blackfoot blood in other First Nations. So a British Army officer was then sent to go investigate conditions in the frontier, and he wrote this: "The region of the Saskatchewan is without law, order, or security for life or property. Robbery and murder for years have gone unpunished. Indian massacres are unchecked even in the close vicinity of the Hudson Bay Company's post, and all civil and legal institutions are entirely unknown." And so what we do is we create what becomes the RCMP, this paramilitary force, and send them out to go and protect the Indigenous people from the American whiskey traders who are bringing them the firewater, essentially this whiskey mixed with sort of chili and things of this nature. And I mean,
John A. Macdonald knows this danger firsthand. So
it's true.
He's just,
and so I mean, you get this shape of almost the first an early humanitarian intervention, where ostensibly the purpose is, well, we must protect these sort of poor benighted people from sort of sin and the vagaries of the people who are abusing them. But what they actually do is they just clear everyone off of the land that the Canadian Pacific Railroad is going to be built on, which is, again, a kind of a story as old as vaguely liberal societies, right?
Classic Canadian politeness. I respect it.
Right, and
human rights based intervention.
And at the same time, right, the same kind of justifications are used by sort of Macdonald and his close associates to write the Indian Act, which basically says it is now criminal to live as a Native Canadian, as an Indigenous person. You now are being, you can no longer wander the land. You're forced to live in reserves, and in so doing, you're basically going to have to farm. You must become sedentary and agricultural. And don't worry about speaking your language, because we are going to, and again, with this force that was born from responsibility, a version of responsibility to protect, we are going to steal your children and kill many of them, effectively. But it was through this quite sort of, it was through this story that these sort of colonial forces are sort of built and deployed, and that are done so, again, in a very, that are done so in a, I think, a quite sort of Canadian way, right? This thing of, oh, well, we're doing everyone a favor, by going out and doing this.
There's not much difference, as an aside, between like the genesis of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and what they've been doing in, like Fairy Creek, for instance. This is, it is a total through line with very little change. Fairy Creek is now, I think, the largest mass arrests in Canadian history for civil disobedience at the behest of a resource extraction company, right? Or
even like what the Mounties are doing for like land and water defenders in BC. It's the same thing. It's the Canadian state, which represents the fact, for example, that either oil has to be taken from the tar sands and piped out into a port in British Columbia, or we need to have a railroad so that for a number of reasons, so that we can knit this country together so the Americans don't take it, and so we can get goods from the Pacific in Vancouver to the Atlantic on the St. Lawrence River. So we need to get these people out of here. It's like, if you look
and
at,
you're being arrested for your own safety too. That's like, if you look at some of the reasoning behind arresting protesters at any of these land defense protests, it's like, well, it's dangerous out here. You can't be hanging out in the forest chaining yourself to a tree, buddy.
You might get eaten by
going to jail.
Might get arrested.
You might get Lyme disease.
Might get Lyme disease.
Chronic Lyme. You don't want that. But it's I think if you look at John A. Macdonald from this perspective, right, I think you sort of find that there's a great deal of continuity between pre-Canadian history, early Canadian history, and modern Canadian history. We've just been doing the same stuff domestically, internationally. We've been worried about the same things. We've even been led by the same kinds of people who engage in the same kinds of foibles, whether it's Rob Ford smoking crack or, getting or there's sort of numerous SNC Lavalin scandals in the Liberal Party. It's just, I feel like Canadian history is this, or at least this sort of official rarefied political Canadian history is just this undifferentiated blob of the management of just the technocratic management of just making sure the resources stay getting extracted smoothly, right? I wonder how that compares to the American story in broad strokes.
I mean, ours history is the same thing. It's just we have a more compelling narrative to lay on top of it, because it is this tale of like struggle and combat to tame and conquer an area, so that even if it is at the end of the day just a business, it's just a resource extraction endeavor, it's just a bunch of companies making profits over time and accumulating capital. The narrative around it is one of action, whereas you don't really have that in Canada, which I think is why there's this instead a fetishizing of politeness and niceness, because that's really all you have to be a prophylactic on top of the grim reality of just pure exploitation.
I think that's really explains a lot of one of our earlier episodes. We talked to Aaron Bertovo from Chapo FYM about Alberta separatism, and I think that explains some of the reason why someone living in Red Deer, for instance, would start waving around like a Confederate flag with maple leaves on it. They need to, if you're looking for some kind of thing to be proud of, you can't find it domestically. If you want it to be combat or struggle, you have to look to the United States.
Yeah, I think this is,
or you have to look to something like Louis Riel, and then shit, you're not, you're a leftist now. Oops.
I think we can draw a line directly from kind of looking at our founding stories this way, or the founding stories of our institutions like the RCMP, which many people are still proud of, and I think you can sort of draw out a lot of the Canadian smugness. It sort of goes through all of it like a vein of butter, right? This idea that, everything was by agreement, everything was sort of well managed, and it was why the Canadian Constitution promises peace, order, and good government. Like that's what we have. We don't have liberty and justice for all. Again, I'm aware that these things are sort of window dressing on the same kinds of activities, but how we tell the story of our history is how we pick our window dressing. And that's how we choose to disguise the awfulness of what it is that we actually do as an organization. And where the Americans choose to sort of put it as a grand story of becoming, we choose to talk about how actually wonderful we all are interpersonally, which, if anything, I find much more annoying. I think is much more cloying.
Yes.
Much less to write home about.
Imagine how different it would be if we just embraced the oaf side of things. It's just, I'm not saying it would be better. It would just be interesting to see like a nation of oafs develop, by oafs, for oafs.
Yeah, that's the good. That's Canada good ending.
Yeah.
We need to be a nation of Rob Fords, not a nation of K.C. Irvings. Anyway, they were contained in one man, in John A. Macdonald, and upon his death were unleashed to cover Canada, like the ghost at the end of Ghostbusters.
Thetans.
Yeah, that's right. We all have too many K.C. Irvings. That's what makes us. That's what prevents us from reaching our potential. We need a C meter, so we can.
You gotta kill
learn.
the K.C. Irving in your head.
Yeah, that's right. But like that's sort of like the all of the sort of textual stuff I've got. So I mean, let's just. So what is, I mean, we could say, like, what does it all mean to sort of understand the sort of nature and factuality, that understand the sort of purpose of these foundational stories and the facts behind them, right? What there is a purpose to that, I feel, but I'm interested to know what you guys think.
I think, looking into, like, when you look at this stuff, I think you have to go through it in a way that's honest, and then as a citizen of this country in 2021, you can try and, as much decision making power as you have, you can act accordingly. But just blind veneration of like a foundation myth is gonna get you nowhere.
And that's what I think Canadian liberals like to do when they talk about how this is or isn't us.
You see that reflected on all sides of the political party here of the political spectrum here in Canada, which is incredibly frustrating. I think it's the thing that underpins. It's the thing motivating the sort of indistinguishable foreign policy from people who are supposed to be left and like right-wing think tanks. It's at the root of all of that.
Yeah, it's because we're all kind of on the same team of managers. And again, it's the same thing in the US, but I think we don't try to hide it. We're proud of it. And I mean, it goes to show that sort of holding this belief or the other belief changes nothing about what your polity actually is and does. Nothing. But I think if you understand the ideological purposes they serve and how they came to be and sort of the histories they're based on, you can be a little bit, I don't know, armed against it, I suppose. You can be resistant to its charms. You can sort of see through a little bit of the supposedly sort of very desirable consensus. I'm not sure. Matt, any final thoughts before we pull this train into the station?
It all sounds very nice. The whole thing. It sounds. I know you guys are like, oh, this sucks. They have all of this fake patina of politeness and consensus, but the grass is always greener on the other side of the border. And I don't know. I guess I'd take it right now.
Well, I mean,
yeah,
that's as good a slogan as any I can think of for Canada. I guess I'll take it right now.
I guess I'll take it right. Just before you go, drunkest American president, contemporaneous.
Well, I mean, Grant has the reputation, but he wasn't really that drunk. His reputation for drunkenness mostly stems from his time as an army officer in California after the Mexican War, where he literally had nothing to do but hang around the state, the forts, and get shit faced. But he drank a good amount. They were all. I would say that the drunkest was Franklin Pierce.
Okay.
Also known as Handsome Frank.
The
And definitely our most
Ugly
handsome
John.
president.
Ugly John, Handsome Frank.
Yeah, the actual opposite of Ugly John. Beautiful head of black hair. A guy who is a bottom tier, like one of the worst presidents, but gets overshadowed by James Buchanan, who comes right after him and who gets most of the blame for allowing the Civil War to break out. But really, if at that point the Democratic Party was just appointing different northern doughfaces to carry out the southern policies, so it easily could have been the other way around. And if Pierce had been chosen after Buchanan, he would have been remembered as the worst president. But so he a doughface is doughface. He was known a best friend of Nathaniel Hawthorne. Was known for being drunk basically all the time at a time when everyone was really drunk. So that really tells you that it must have been a lot of alcohol. But like Macdonald, he had personal tragedy in his life that sort of makes the drunkenness more understandable. His son was killed in a train accident in front of him shortly before his assumption of the presidency.
God.
Oh no. It's not how you want to kick off a presidency, to be honest.
No.
Anyway, it is after midnight for me over here in Britain. So unless I'm gonna go be one of the oafs overseen by the overseers in Canada, I think it's about time for us to finish bringing this train into the station. So, Matt, thank you very much for coming on once again and talking about some Canadian prime ministers.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you, man.
And thank you to all of you out there for listening. And don't forget, there's a second episode available every week. It can be yours for the low price of 7 of our Canadian dollars per month on Patreon, as is normal. So you know what to do. In the meantime, I guess we'll see you in a few days for a discussion of the wit and questionable wisdom of Canadian Gen X, the voice of Gen X Canada, Douglas Copeland.
He just won't go away. He's that good. We have to keep hearing about what Douglas Copeland thinks about things.
So if you're an American and want an American equivalent, it is American Bret Easton Ellis, but kind of seen through the eyes of Portlandia. It's really annoying.
Good stuff.
So we'll catch you then. Bye, everybody.
Bye.